Imagine trying to convince, like, thousands of people that a highly controversial, locally executed political prisoner is suddenly alive.
Right.
And you aren't trying to do this in some distant, uneducated province where rumors are hard to verify. You are attempting to spark this movement in the exact same city where he was publicly tortured and killed just weeks prior.
Yeah, the geography alone is wild.
I mean, the authorities who ordered his death are still in power. The executioners are still on duty. The grave where he was buried is literally a short walk away.
It's an easily falsifiable claim.
Exactly. To make a claim like that in a geographic location where your facts can be instantly checked is an incredibly dangerous starting point for a historical movement.
The physical reality, the geography, and the political power structures are all, sitting right there to instantly crush the movement.
Okay, let's unpack this. That unbelievable tension making an impossible claim in the very place where anyone could supposedly prove it wrong. That is the starting point for our deep dive today. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We are taking you on a purely analytical, historical journey into what is undoubtedly one of the most debated claims in human history, the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth.
But before we really dig into the timeline, we have to set some firm ground rules.
Good idea.
Our mission today is not theological. We are wearing our historian hats. We are going to look at the historical arguments, the cultural context of the first century, and the logical deductions surrounding the resurrection.
Right, we are remaining completely impartial.
Exactly. This isn't about endorsing a religious viewpoint. It's about exploring the secular records, the psychology of the early movement, and the rigorous arguments presented by scholars and skeptics alike. We are dissecting the anatomy of the claim itself.
Well, let's jump right into the stakes here
Yeah.
because they are astronomically high. If you look at a text written by the Apostle Paul, specifically 1 Corinthians 15:3, he essentially writes that if the resurrection didn't physically happen, then the entire Christian faith is completely, to use his word, useless.
Yeah, that's a bold statement.
Right. The religion itself admits that its entire philosophical and moral framework hinges on this single historical event.
Which is incredibly rare for a world religion.
Right.
I mean, if you analyze other major historical religious figures, Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius, the foundational narratives of their movements do not hinge on a physical resurrection.
They just don't.
No. Their followers openly acknowledge that they lived, they taught, they died, and their bodies stayed in the grave. The enduring legacy was supposed to be in their teachings,
Right?
but the earliest followers of Jesus made a fundamentally different, exceptionally radical claim. They staked everything on the assertion that he was publicly crucified, buried, and then physically walked out of a tomb.
And I want to pause on that 1 Corinthians text for a second, because a skeptic might say, well, Paul wrote that decades later. It's easy for legends to grow over 50 or 100 years.
Sure, that's a common assumption.
But historians don't actually view that specific text as a late legend, do they?
No, they don't. And this is where the textual history gets really fascinating. Critical scholars, including secular and atheist historians, have analyzed the structure of 1 Corinthians 15. The verses where Paul lists the people who saw the resurrected Jesus are structured as an early creed. In the original language, it has this rhythmic oral tradition cadence.
Like a chant or a poem to help people memorize it.
Exactly. And based on linguistic analysis and historical dating, scholars widely agree that Paul received this creed incredibly early. We are talking about a finalized statement of belief that dates back to within 3 to 5 years of the actual crucifixion.
Wait, really? 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
That completely shatters the idea that this was some myth that evolved over centuries, like the legends of Hercules or King Arthur.
Precisely. Myths usually require generations to form, specifically so the original eyewitnesses die off and can't contradict the new fantastical stories. But this creed was circulating in Jerusalem, while the people who supposedly saw it, the people who actively executed him, were still walking the streets.
Which brings us back to the glaring geographical problem. The Jewish and Roman authorities desperately wanted to crush this disruptive movement.
Oh, absolutely.
And the absolute easiest way to do that, the fatal blow to Christianity before it even took a breath, would have been to simply walk over to the tomb, pull out the body, and parade it through the streets of Jerusalem. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the body. Go home.
Right. It's the ultimate trump card.
Yeah.
But they never played it.
Because they couldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The historical consensus from across the spectrum is that the authorities didn't produce a body because they couldn't.
Okay, let's unpack this. So they couldn't produce a corpse. That forces us to look at what they actually did find. They found an empty tomb.
Right.
Now let's look at the specific historical claims about that empty tomb, because if I'm inventing a hoax in the ancient world, I am going to write my story to be as credible and airtight as possible. But the earliest texts claim that the very first people to discover the empty tomb were women.
And to understand why that detail is so explosive, we have to understand the patriarchal legal mechanisms of first-century Judea.
Right, because it was a very different world.
Entirely. In that era, the testimony of women was highly marginalized. If you read first-century rabbinic texts or the historian Josephus, they explicitly state that the testimony of women was generally not admissible in a court of law. They were culturally viewed as unreliable witnesses.
So if you are a group of male disciples sitting around a table trying to invent a hoax to sell to a deeply patriarchal society, this is like the worst possible PR strategy.
Exactly. Historians analyze texts using something called the criterion of embarrassment.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah, it basically says if a historical account includes details that are awkward, culturally damaging, or detrimental to the author's cause, it is highly likely to be true.
Because why would you invent something that hurts your own argument?
Right. If they were making it up, they would have logically written the story so that the respected male leaders like Peter or John were the ones who heroically discovered the empty tomb and brilliantly deduced the resurrection.
You don't deliberately weaken your own fake story. The only logical reason you write that women found the tomb first is if you are stubbornly committed to reporting what actually happened, regardless of the cultural embarrassment.
Precisely. And we also have to look at how the hostile authorities reacted to this empty tomb claim.
Oh, this is fascinating.
They didn't put out a decree saying, ignore the rumors, his body is still rotting in the grave.
Yeah.
Their official response, which is recorded in the historical texts, was to claim that the disciples snuck in and stole the body.
Which is such a massive tactical error on their part.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, by officially claiming the body was stolen, the enemies of the movement were accidentally confirming the foundational premise. The tomb was empty.
It's like saying, I didn't steal your car, my cousin stole it. You're admitting the car is gone.
Exactly. Both sides completely agreed the body was missing. They just violently disagreed on how it went missing.
It's an implicit admission of the facts on the ground. However, as any good historical investigator will point out, an empty tomb does not automatically equal a supernatural resurrection.
Oh.
A missing corpse is just a missing corpse.
Completely agree. Let's be rational about this. If the body wasn't there and the Romans didn't move it, we have to look at the alternative secular explanations.
Okay, let's go through them.
Let's start with the most obvious one. What if Jesus just didn't die on the cross? People survive crazy trauma. Maybe he passed out from the pain, the Romans mistakenly thought he was dead, and he woke up a few days later in the cool, damp tomb.
It's a common theory, often called the swoon theory. On the surface, if you are detached from the historical realities of the ancient world, it sounds plausible.
Sure.
But when you apply medical science and historical knowledge to what a Roman crucifixion actually entailed, the mechanism of survival becomes physically impossible.
Unpack the mechanics of that for us, because the Romans weren't just casually hanging people up.
No, the Romans were professional executioners. Death was guaranteed. First, there was the scourging.
Which sounds brutal just on its own.
It was horrific. The victim was whipped with a flagrum, a whip braided with shards of bone and lead. This stripped the flesh down to the muscle, often exposing veins and organs, inducing severe hypovolemic shock from blood loss.
So he's already in critical condition before the crucifixion even begins.
Exactly. Many prisoners died before they even made it to the cross. Then, thick iron spikes are driven through the wrists and the feet. But crucifixion wasn't a death by bleeding. It was death by asphyxiation.
Wait, suffocation?
Yeah. To breathe out, the victim had to push up on the nailed feet, scraping their torn back against the rough wood, just to get a breath. Eventually, exhaustion sets in, they can no longer push up, and they suffocate.
And the historical accounts say the Romans thrust a spear into his side to confirm death, bringing out a flow of blood and water.
Which is a crucial medical detail. Modern cardiologists have analyzed that specific description and concluded that the spear pierced the pericardium.
That's the sac around the heart, right?
Yes, it fills with watery fluid when a person is under extreme physiological stress and suffocation. It's called a pericardial effusion. The Romans didn't have medical degrees, but they knew a dead body when they saw one.
Okay, let's unpack this. So if a guy survives the scourging, the asphyxiation, and the spear thrust, wakes up 3 days later in a sealed tomb without medical care, food, or water, manages to unwrap himself from heavy burial linens, pushes a boulder weighing thousands of pounds out of a trench, and then fights off an armed Roman guard.
He doesn't walk into a room looking like the divine conqueror of death.
He looks like a man in desperate need of an intensive care unit.
Exactly. He looks like he barely survived a horror movie. That wouldn't inspire a religion of ultimate victory. It would inspire people to call a doctor.
Right. Okay, so the swoon theory requires ignoring basic biology. Let's look at the authorities' own alibi. The disciples stole the body. Grave robbing was incredibly common in the ancient world. Why couldn't a few guys just sneak in at night and take him?
Because we have to look at the specific security measures taken at this particular tomb. The historical record indicates a custodio was stationed there, a unit of Roman guards.
But couldn't they have just been asleep? The authorities even claimed the guards were sleeping when the disciples snuck by.
That claim actually highlights the absurdity of the theory. Roman guard units were elite, highly disciplined military personnel. They worked in shifts.
Right. They weren't just mall cops.
Not at all. The penalty in the Roman military for falling asleep on watch or allowing a prisoner to escape was often a horrific execution for the guards involved. The idea that an entire unit of elite soldiers fell deeply asleep at the exact same time is highly improbable.
And even if they did, rolling away a massive stone block isn't exactly a quiet operation.
Exactly. You are talking about a stone that weighed upwards of a ton, seated in a grooved track. It would require several men to move it, creating a massive amount of noise.
So the stolen body theory requires us to believe that a ragtag group of terrified, traumatized fishermen managed to outsmart an elite military unit, heave a giant boulder out of a trench, and sneak off with a corpse without waking a single soldier.
It's just not realistic. And let's look at the psychology of the disciples in that scenario. If they stole the body, they know the resurrection is a lie.
Right. They personally orchestrated the hoax.
Why would they then spend the rest of their lives embracing poverty, torture, and eventually execution for a movement they knew they fabricated?
Nobody willingly gets beaten to a pulp and crucified for a lie they invented.
That is the breaking point for the stolen body theory. The human survival instinct is too strong, which brings skeptics to a third, much more sophisticated explanation. Psychology. If they didn't steal the body and Jesus didn't survive the cross, maybe it was all in their heads.
The hallucination theory. And to be fair, grief hallucinations are a clinically recognized phenomenon. People who are mourning a severe loss often report hearing their loved one's voice or catching a glimpse of them in a crowd.
Yeah, the brain is powerful. It projects what it desperately wants to see.
Right.
That's entirely true. Bereavement visions are a documented clinical reality. But we have to look at the specific mechanism of how hallucinations work. A hallucination is a strictly individual, internal event.
Like a dream.
Exactly. It is a projection of a person's individual brain chemistry. I cannot invite you to participate in my hallucination any more than I can invite you to share my dream.
But the historical claims aren't just about Peter sitting alone in a dark room having a fleeting vision.
No. The early creeds and texts claim that Jesus appeared to multiple groups of people in different locations, engaging in multisensory interactions, eating with them, talking with them, letting them touch him. Furthermore, the texts claim he appeared to over 500 people at the exact same time.
And 500 people cannot share the exact same hallucination.
Clinically speaking, the psychological odds of 500 different brains spontaneously generating the exact same complex, interactive, multisensory hallucination at the exact same moment are virtually zero.
Wow.
It contradicts everything modern psychiatry understands about human neurology.
Yeah.
Furthermore, there's a cultural barrier.
What do you mean?
First-century Jews did not believe in a dying and rising Messiah, nor did they believe in an individual resurrecting in the middle of human history. Their theology taught a general resurrection of everyone at the end of the world.
Oh, I see. So they weren't even neurologically or culturally primed to hallucinate this specific event. They weren't expecting it at all.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the medical reality of crucifixion destroys the swoon theory, logistics and psychology destroy the stolen body theory, and clinical psychiatry dismantles the mass hallucination theory, we have to look at the humans involved. What actually happened to these people?
We have to analyze the profound psychological transformation of the early followers. The before and after contrast is staggering.
The before picture is incredibly bleak. I mean, when Jesus was arrested, his followers scattered, they were cowards. Peter famously denied even knowing Jesus to a servant girl just to save his own skin.
Yep.
After the crucifixion, they were hiding in a locked room. Terrified, the Roman soldiers were coming to drag them to crosses of their own.
And then, almost overnight, we witness a psychological paradigm shift that defies easy historical explanation.
Right.
These exact same cowering men unlocked the doors, walked directly into the public squares of Jerusalem, where the men who executed their leader are still patrolling, and they begin fearlessly proclaiming that he is alive.
And they face horrific consequences for it. They weren't getting rich off this claim. They faced public beatings, they were thrown into prisons, and nearly all of the original core group were eventually tortured and executed specifically for refusing to recant this belief.
Which forms the bedrock of the historical martyrdom argument. It is absolutely true that throughout history, people have willingly died for lies. Cult members die for false beliefs. Extremists die for twisted ideologies.
Sadly, yes.
But there is a crucial distinction. They only die for those lies if they genuinely believe they are true.
That's the key. You might die for a delusion you've been brainwashed into believing, but you will not die for a lie that you personally orchestrated. The moment the Roman guards bring out the torture racks, that is the exact moment you say, okay, stop, it was a prank. We hid the body in a cave down the road.
Right. Their willingness to endure torture doesn't categorically prove that a supernatural resurrection occurred.
Yeah.
However, it proves beyond a shadow of a psychological doubt that these men genuinely believed they had physically interacted with the resurrected Christ.
They weren't faking it?
They were not con artists running a scam. Whatever they experienced, it was profound enough to override their deepest, most primal survival instincts.
I hear all of this, but a skeptic listening right now could still raise a very valid red flag. They could say, look, everything we are discussing, the empty tomb, the 500 witnesses, the bravery of the disciples, we are pulling this largely from Christian texts. Of course, the Christian documents are going to say Christianity is true.
Sure, that's a fair point.
So, do we have an actual paper trail outside of the Bible? What does the secular record say?
It's a vital question. And the answer is yes. We have extra-biblical, entirely secular evidence from the ancient world that anchors this narrative in undeniable history. We can look at two major historical figures, the Roman historian Tacitus and the Jewish historian Josephus.
Let's start with Tacitus, because he had absolutely no vested interest in making Christianity look good. To him, they were a bizarre, annoying cult.
Precisely. Tacitus was a hostile source writing in the early 2nd century. Yet, in his annals, he specifically writes about the Christians and confirms on the official Roman record that their founder, Christus, suffered the extreme penalty crucifixion during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of the governor Pontius Pilate.
So that locks in the execution?
Yes. Tacitus confirms the execution is a historical fact, and he notes that this mischievous superstition broke out not just in Judea, but all the way to Rome.
But what about Josephus? Because any historian worth their salt is going to immediately point out that Josephus's writings were tampered with. There's that famous passage, the Testimonium Flavianum, where Josephus supposedly calls Jesus the Messiah. But scholars know Christian monks in the Middle Ages added parts to that text to make it sound more pro-Christian. Doesn't that invalidate him as a source?
You're entirely right to bring up the interpolations, and it's a great example of why rigorous historical method is necessary. Yes, later scribes definitely embellished parts of the Testimonium Flavianum.
Okay.
However, modern textual critics have meticulously analyzed the passage to strip away the later Christian additions and uncover the authentic original core written by Josephus.
And what does that authentic core actually say?
Even stripped of the embellishments, Josephus still confirms that Jesus was a historical figure, that he was a teacher who drew large crowds, that he was condemned to the cross by Pilate at the suggestion of Jewish leaders, and that the tribe of Christians named after him did not cease to exist after his death.
So, when we strip away the theology and just look at the raw data, what does this all mean for us today?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means that the foundational pillars of the narrative are locked into secular history. You can absolutely debate the supernatural claims. You can debate the miracles.
Sure.
But you cannot honestly claim that Jesus of Nazareth was merely a made-up myth or that his public execution was a fairy tale. The hostile, secular sources definitively true of his existence, his crucifixion, and the undeniable fact that a radical movement exploded in his name immediately afterward.
And it didn't just explode, it endured. Despite facing intense state-sponsored persecution from the Roman Empire for nearly 3 centuries, Christianity spread like wildfire across the known world. Which brings us to the core dilemma that we have to confront. When you look at all the historical evidence, the psychological data, and the cultural context, you hit a profound philosophical wall.
Because the implications are entirely different depending on the conclusion you arrive at. A dead Jesus is comfortable. A dead historical teacher who gave some good moral advice demands absolutely nothing of you. You can take his teachings, you can leave them, or you can ignore him completely.
But if you look at the historical mechanisms, if you conclude that the swoon theory is medically absurd, the stolen body theory is logistically impossible, the hallucination theory is psychiatrically unsound, and the early martyrs weren't lying, then you are forced to grapple with the reality of an empty tomb.
Right.
And an empty tomb means you are no longer dealing with a dead teacher, you are dealing with a living king. And that shift takes this entirely out of the realm of abstract historical curiosity and places it squarely into the realm of personal accountability. It demands a response.
It entirely reorients how a person understands the fabric of reality, the nature of life, the finality of death, and human purpose.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the terrifying geographical risk of launching a resurrection claim in the very shadow of the executioner's cross. We examined the culturally embarrassing yet highly authentic detail that women were the primary witnesses to an empty tomb.
We subjected the alternative theories to the harsh realities of first-century Roman military protocols and modern medical and psychiatric science. We analyzed the radical, inexplicable psychological transformation of a group of broken cowards into fearless martyrs.
And we anchored all of this in the corroborating hostile records of historians like Tacitus and Josephus.
But as we close this deep dive, the final synthesis is entirely up to you.
You have to look at that empty tomb in Jerusalem and answer the question for yourself. Was this the most elaborate, perfectly executed lie in human history? Was it an unexplainable mass delusion? Or was it exactly what those early terrified followers confidently claimed it was?
The evidence is on the table, but the verdict is yours.
So, here is a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. Even if you view all of this entirely through a skeptical, secular lens, the historical reality remains untouched. A tiny, terrified group of uneducated fishermen in the first century became so deeply, unshakably convinced of an impossible event that they welcomed their own brutal executions.
Astounding.
And in doing so, they accidentally laid the foundation for a movement that completely outlasted the mighty Roman Empire itself. It is, without a doubt, one of the most profound mysteries of human psychology and history. What does it take for a single, unbelievable idea to completely rewrite the world?
It's a question that history still demands an answer to.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.